I was just looking into this alternate history story set in the 1940s, and it paints this incredibly unsettling picture of the American dream gone wrong. On the surface, it looks like a moment of triumph. Charles Lindbergh, the dashing aviator and ultimate celebrity hero, has just shocked the world by defeating FDR to become president. People are cheering in the streets, convinced they voted for peace and America first. But then you look at these same events through the eyes of the Roth family in Newark, and that celebration instantly warps into a horror show. What's really striking is how the story handles the transition. You expect immediate troops in the streets, but instead it describes this slow erosion of normal life. The neighbors who stop making eye contact, the subtle exclusions from community events, the assimilation programs that sound helpful but feel like traps. There's even this bizarre recurring symbol mentioned in the analysis, an escalator inside the house. It's a modern marvel, but it becomes this chilling metaphor because it only goes one way down. It represents this mechanical, unstoppable descent into chaos that the characters feel powerless to halt. That contrast is what haunts you. The dissonance of a nation falling in love with a charismatic leader, while a minority population watches their civil liberties evaporate in broad daylight. It really forces you to ask, if the hero of the story turned into the villain, would the public cheer for him anyway? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to analyze how this alternate history story, Philip Roth's The Plot Against America, serves as a prescient warning against the gradual, often invisible, erosion of democratic norms.
Right, and the institutional betrayal of these foundational principles.
You are really looking at how easily the social contract can be rewritten when the national mood shifts.
And we are going to dive deep into the sociological implications of that. Things like societal fragmentation. We'll investigate how that organic social cohesion dissolves as depicted in the narrative and, draw some parallels to contemporary debates on identity politics.
And the weakening of community bonds we see in Western societies today.
No.
It's almost like a roadmap of how an us versus them mentality can be weaponized.
Exactly.
And finally, we're going to examine the novel's profound critique of historical determinism.
That's that comfortable but often dangerous belief that progress is just inevitable.
Right. We want to highlight how demagoguery and the manipulation of these huge macro trends can rapidly dismantle established social contracts.
Even in a nation that seems completely stable.
It really asks, what if history isn't always moving toward the good? Okay, so let's unpack this with the inciting incident. The nexus point of this whole alternate reality.
The 1940 presidential election.
Exactly. Historically, of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won his unprecedented third term. He was leading America toward eventual intervention in World War II.
But in this timeline, the shock happens. The isolationist hero, Charles Lindbergh, defeats FDR.
And it's not just a political upset, right? It's a total recalibration of American identity.
It is. And what makes this what-if moment so brilliant is that it uses the real-life contradictions of Charles Lindbergh himself.
He wasn't some fringe candidate.
Not at all. He was, arguably, the most famous American of the 20th century up to that point. The great aviator, the quintessential American hero.
Famous for his solo, nonstop flight across the Atlantic in 1927. He really embodied that idea of American ingenuity and individualism.
Right, but his later life, and especially his political activism in the late 1930s, reveals this much darker ideology lurking just beneath that heroic surface.
He wasn't just an isolationist. He was a known Nazi sympathizer.
A well-known one. We know from history that he accepted a highly prestigious medal from Nazi Germany in 1938.
The Service Cross of the German Eagle.
From Hermann Goering himself.
And what was so crucial to the whole premise is that Lindbergh refused to return that medal.
He refused. Even after the U.S. began preparing for war and Nazi Germany became a declared enemy, this wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was rooted in this deep-seated, explicit prejudice.
Absolutely. His views were dangerously racist and anti-Semitic. His whole political stance wasn't just about keeping America out of a European war.
No, it was based on an ideology of racial superiority.
And the story uses his actual words to prove it.
Precisely. In his actual 1941 Des Moines speech, which is quoted extensively in the book, Lindbergh identified the three greatest threats to America as the British, the Roosevelt administration, and the Jewish people.
I mean, that's the real historical dirt right there.
It is. He genuinely felt that if the U.S. had to pick a partner, Germany was a better ally than the Soviet Union.
And not just because of anti-communism.
No, it was also due to this explicit fear he had of the potential rise of what he called the semi-Asiatic masses, who he considered racially and genetically inferior.
So that underlying racial bias is the toxic political foundation that his whole fictional presidency is built on.
And the political shift is immediate and dramatic. His presidency instantly redefines foreign policy,
Moving the U.S. from preparing for war to just embracing neutrality.
He signs non-aggression pacts with the Axis powers. They're referred to ominously as the Iceland Understanding with Germany.
And the Hawaii Understanding with Japan.
And these pacts are the immediate legislative manifestation of his America First rhetoric. The majority of Americans, tired of the Depression and fearful of another world war, they cheered for this.
They saw it as a win. They thought they had voted for peace.
They see these understandings as brilliant diplomatic maneuvers. But for the minorities they targeted, these were instant declarations of war.
And what's so fascinating about alternate history is that it forces you to reconsider what you take for granted. Before we even judge the plausibility of a Lindbergh presidency, we have to look at the real-life precarity of American democracy in the 1940s.
This is such a critical point. We look back now with the comfort of historical outcome, the Allied victory, the rise of post-war liberalism, and we just assume American democracy was always this stable, tolerant thing.
But the reality was so much more fragile. Even under FDR, anti-Semitism was deeply and institutionally pervasive in the U.S.
Right. Let's be brutally clear about the state of American tolerance at the time. President Roosevelt, the great champion of democracy, he himself closed the door on Jewish refugees who were fleeing the Holocaust.
The prime example, which gives this whole fictional history its painful weight, is the voyage of the St. Louis in 1939.
This ship carried over 900 Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe. They were denied entry in Cuba, and then they sailed toward the Florida coast, hoping for asylum in the U.S.
And the ship was turned away by the U.S. Coast Guard under presidential orders.
They were forced back to Europe, and tragically, a huge number of those passengers subsequently died in the Holocaust.
That one event provides all the context you need, really. If the country could reject hundreds of refugees staring down extinction, how stable were the rights of existing Jewish American citizens?
And the general public sentiment was startlingly clear, too. A Roper poll in 1939 found that only 39% of Americans felt that Jews should be treated like other people.
Only 39%.
And this was institutionalized beyond immigration policy, too. Many universities, including Ivy League schools, had restrictive quotas on Jewish admissions throughout the 30s and 40s, often capped them at 10%.
So Roth isn't inventing prejudice out of thin air.
Not at all. He's taking the accepted, pervasive social and political reality of American anti-Semitism and just granting it the highest possible state endorsement under President Lindbergh.
Which is why the story, filtered through the intimate perspective of the Roth family, is so immediate and so devastating.
Right. The family sees Lindbergh's national celebration as a horror show.
And their perspective is crucial. They're a secular middle-class family, 3 generations removed from their migrant roots, living comfortably in Newark.
Their self-perception is one of complete integration. They observe national holidays, they're educated, and they take their status as full citizens for granted.
They see themselves as active, necessary participants in that constitutive story of America, the whole idea that this nation is a welcoming land for the persecuted.
It's that profound sense of belonging that makes the initial signs of trouble so powerful.
And the novel leaves no doubt about the moment their faith is punctured. It happens early on when Herman, the father, takes the family to Washington, D.C. They try to check into a hotel where they have a prepaid reservation, only to be told it's mysteriously gone. There's no space for them.
And the narrative doesn't even need to spell out the reason.
No, the rejection is the immediate application of social prejudice. For the Roths, that moment is their swift expulsion from this metaphorical American Garden of Eden.
The sense of belonging, which they believed was guaranteed by the Constitution and just by birthright, proves to be ephemeral.
It's subject to the political whims of the majority and the prejudices of the state.
And this sets the stage perfectly for the terrifying core of the novel. The institutionalization of that subtle rejection, transforming private bigotry into public policy.
We are moving from the individual slight to the state-sanctioned mechanism of oppression.
Okay, so let's get into the implementation phase. If the Lindbergh administration didn't send troops into Newark, how did they exert control and dismantle minority rights?
Well, this is where that metaphor of the one-way escalator comes back into play, isn't it? The descent is mechanized and slow.
That slow erosion is the key mechanism.
It is, and it starts with the establishment of the Office of American Absorption, or the OAA.
And this department is the perfect example of institutionalized anti-Semitism masked in bureaucracy and euphemism. The marketing is vital. The OAA's stated purpose sounds so positive, even civic-minded, to implement programs encouraging America's religious and national minorities to become further incorporated into the larger society.
Further incorporated.
And that is the insidious genius of it. They are using language that historically signified progress, incorporation, absorption, integration, but they are weaponizing it against citizens who are already integrated.
Right. If you are already a citizen, and the state tells you that you need to be further absorbed,
it instantly retroactively defines you as deficient, as the other.
So the actual goal isn't benevolent absorption, it's alienation and erasure.
The initiatives are designed to turn Jewish citizens into aliens in their own home and expunge them from the nation's core story.
By framing them as people who need to try harder to be American, they make the victims responsible for their own marginalization.
And this tactic is essential for normalizing oppression, especially in a democracy that prides itself on fairness. If the marginalized group is seen as refusing to integrate, then the state policies designed to force that integration appear justified.
Reasonable, even necessary to maintain national unity.
Exactly.
And the first major program is the Just Folks Initiative. It sounds like a charming summer camp. A volunteer work program introducing city youth to the traditional ways of heartland life.
But the real goal is ideological re-education.
It immediately targets the next generation, which shows how autocracies try to control the future by manipulating the youth.
And the case study here is Philip's older brother, Sandy. Sandy is already insecure, anxious to fit in, and he secretly harbors this admiration for the charismatic Lindbergh.
So he volunteers for Just Folks out of a desire for acceptance.
He does. They send Sandy to a tobacco farm in Danville, Kentucky for the summer, and he is successfully indoctrinated.
He doesn't just tolerate the experience, he embraces it completely.
Totally. He comes back with a regional accent, eating pork and bacon, learning heartland skills like weeding tobacco. He becomes the program's poster boy.
And this creates an immediate, painful rift with his father, Herman.
A huge rift. And the choice of Kentucky as the destination is so symbolic and structural. It's chosen deliberately as a synecdoche.
Okay, so for listeners, a synecdoche is when you use a small part to represent the entire whole.
Right. And here, Kentucky represents a very specific hegemonic brand of idealized Americanness, rural, agricultural, and rooted in an idealized, often white, Christian frontier myth.
You see that through the figure of the farm owner, Mr. Mawhinney, who boasts that his land has been in the family since the days of Daniel Boone.
The program connects the experience directly to the myth of westward expansion, purposefully divorcing Sandy from the urban, liberal, intellectual, and Jewish environment of Newark.
It's a mechanism for cultural erasure, dressed up as cultural exchange.
It is. The program takes the concept of the American melting pot and turns it into a cultural mandate. Every ingredient must be melted down into the hegemonic WASP flavor,
Eliminating all minority distinction.
And what's truly chilling is the clear historical blueprint for this type of forced Americanization.
What historical precedent is he drawing on?
The analysis points directly to the historical practice of forced Americanization of Native Americans, specifically the horrific chapter of off-reservation boarding schools.
Like the Carlisle Indian Industrial School.
The most famous example. And the philosophy behind institutions like Carlisle was infamously stated as kill the Indian to save the man.
Wow.
These schools prohibited indigenous languages, forced students to adopt white clothing and mannerisms, and were designed to break up tribal ties and sever children from their heritage.
So Just Folks operates on the exact same premise, stripping away the cultural markers of Jewish identity, Yiddish, cuisine, urban life, to replace them with a state-approved version of Americanness.
And the irony is immense because, historically, American Jewish summer camps were designed to do the complete opposite.
To create and promote a transnational Jewish identity, teaching Hebrew and Yiddish.
Right. Focusing on rituals. Lindbergh's administration just takes that structure and morphs it into a tool of cultural destruction, intentionally creating this chasm between the assimilated youth and the older generation.
And this sets the stage for the next, more aggressive phase of institutional betrayal, Homestead 42.
This is where the OAA moves from youth camps to systematic, institutionalized displacement. The slow erosion escalates into full legislative action.
Homestead 42 is a dark repurposing of the original 1862 Homestead Act, which incentivized settlers to move west.
But Lindbergh's administration uses this concept and replaces incentive with coercion. They use job loss pressure and economic destabilization to force Jewish citizens to settle in distant non-Jewish areas.
Places like Montana, Kansas, or Oklahoma.
The displacement is cloaked as an opportunity to strengthen national membership, to enrich their Americanness. But the true goal, like you said, is dilution.
Dispersal fosters a loss of Jewish practices and identity, because those individuals lose the support network necessary to sustain their community.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here is the sheer political mechanism at play. This is an application of gerrymandering through displacement.
It's a form of racial vote dilution, or cracking.
So to put that simply for you listening, imagine you have a large, politically active community, like a concentrated handful of marbles in one place, giving them collective weight. Cracking is the mechanism of taking that handful and spreading them out across a huge, vast floor. You lose all their collective weight, their solidarity, and their ballot power.
So by breaking apart these geographically concentrated Jewish communities, the administration neutralizes their political voice and restricts their citizenship rights all at once.
And this is where the process stops being just social ostracism and becomes definitive legislative restriction.
The Roths are hit directly by this when Herman receives a relocation letter from his insurance company. They're forcing him to move the family to Kentucky.
The same symbolic heartland that assimilated Sandy.
And Herman's reaction is defiant. He refuses to accept it, resigning his job instead.
Herman maintains his resolute, almost naive faith in the system, but Bess, his wife, has the sharper, more painful realization.
She says that line that is just the heart of the novel's trauma. Lindbergh is teaching us what it is to be Jews. We only think we're Americans.
That line is the moment she realizes their citizenship was always conditional, a privilege that could be revoked at any time.
The institutional betrayal is complete.
And this initiative has these striking historical parallels that link this American alternate history directly to European horrors.
Right. It bears similarities to the Nazi process of Germanization, or Lebensraum, the drive for living space, which involved deporting undesirables.
And the horrifying historical irony is inescapable. The Nazi Lebensraum ideology was itself partly inspired by the American doctrine of manifest destiny and westward expansion at the expense of native populations.
So Roth is showing us that the institutional mechanisms of oppression displacement, forced assimilation, are cyclical and universally adaptable.
He's reconfiguring the experience of Jim Crow segregation, which targeted African Americans, and applying it to Jewish Americans. The message is clear. The mechanisms of othering are simple, they are effective, and they are easily repurposed against any minority when the majority's fear is amplified by a powerful leader.
So the political stage is set, the laws are codified. But what happens when that external pressure is applied directly to the most basic unit of society, the family?
This is where the novel shifts focus. It shows us how political erosion creates deep, personal, generational, and ideological tensions right inside the Roth household.
History, for young Philip, is internalized as domestic conflict.
And these internal rifts demonstrate exactly how political extremism corrodes the most fundamental unit of social cohesion. The family is supposed to be the bulwark against the outside world.
But here, the outside world breaches that defense through ideological division.
Starting with Herman, the patriarch. He's the idealistic figure. He believes so deeply in the sanctity of procedural democracy that he clings to the notion of checks and balances, even as they're visibly failing.
You know, I don't know if I'd call it naivete, though. It's more like a desperate, almost religious faith in the system.
That's a good way to put it. He insists, I believe in this country, I love this country, you know what I love, Election Day. His faith is fixed on that idealized state fantasy.
He believes the democratic institutions will ultimately defend him if he just holds his ground. For him, sitting in an armchair and listening to the radio is an act of civic resistance.
But Bess, his wife, is the pragmatic realist. She is focused on survival.
She immediately sees the raw physical danger and asks Herman how he could be so blind to what Lindbergh's supporters are capable of.
She understands that procedural rules are useless when the men with guns decide to ignore them.
And her perspective is tragically validated by the rift that opens with her own sister, Evelyn Bengelsdorf.
Evelyn's choice to work for the OAA creates this deep, immediate bitterness and estrangement with Bess.
The shared bond of sisterhood is fractured by political and moral compromise, only to be reconciled much later by a shared primal fear.
And then you have Sandy, the assimilator. His willingness, his eagerness to participate in just folks is a source of profound sorrow for Herman.
Herman sees his own family being tainted and torn apart by the rise of fascism. Sandy's participation isn't active malice, but it's a devastating form of passive collaboration.
It's driven by the fear of being seen as different. He's the first to fall to the pressure of conformity.
Which brings us directly to the concept of collaborators. The novel gives us these complex, often tragic figures who enable the system.
Usually out of self-interest, opportunism, or perhaps most dangerously, this excessive confidence that they can control the resulting chaos.
And the most prominent example is Rabbi Lionel Bengelsdorf. He supports Lindbergh, using his religious authority to try to kosher him for the goyim, as the analysis puts it.
He's driven by overconfidence and a love for the spotlight and political power.
He minimizes Lindbergh's overt anti-Semitism, claiming it stems from rustic ignorance, not malice.
He believes he can be the liaison, the necessary voice that will modulate Lindbergh's extremism. And this is where Roth uses one of the most provocative parallels in the novel.
He depicts Bengelsdorf as a Judenrat-type collaborator.
Yes, and we need to unpack that term because it carries immense historical weight.
So what were the Judenrat?
The Judenrat were the Jewish councils that the Nazis established in the ghettos of Europe. They were forced to administer their communities under German authority, carrying out Nazi orders.
Like collecting taxes, organizing labor.
And ultimately compiling deportation lists. They were often established with the promise of protecting their communities, but they became morally compromised tools of the regime.
So Roth is applying that term Judenrat to an American rabbi. He's suggesting that Bengelsdorf's misplaced confidence makes him complicit in the oppression of his own people.
Even if he initially believes he is doing good.
That's
exactly. Bengelsdorf is playing a political game he cannot win.
And his excessive confidence ultimately leads to his downfall when he tries to exert influence on the First Lady and is promptly arrested by the FBI.
The system he tried to manage ultimately consumes him.
And then there's his ethically malleable wife, Evelyn Bengelsdorf, who is Bess's sister.
She seeks wealth and security, marrying the rabbi primarily for the brush with celebrity and influence in the new administration.
She displays this high susceptibility to conformity. She willingly buys into the OAA's benign descriptions of programs like Just Folks.
She chooses to ignore the dog whistle that city values as just a euphemism for Jewish culture. Her motivation is purely class and social aspiration.
And she displays this appalling willingness to prioritize her desire for acceptance over her religious identity. She even accommodates the Nazi foreign minister von Ribbentrop at a White House dinner,
thinking that her social class and proximity to power will keep her insulated from anti-Semitism.
And her betrayal is solidified when she's depicted making small changes to the OAA relocation lists, substituting another family for the Roths.
A pathetic attempt to use her corrupt power to save her family, which only implicates her further. And her entire world collapses after Lionel's arrest. The consequence is devastatingly intimate.
She's reduced to a pathetic, terrified victim. The great social climber ends up hiding, half-starved and shaking, in the Roth's basement.
The very sister she had abandoned. The irony is overwhelming. She helped implement the system only to become its victim, hiding in the very place her estranged family provides as a sanctuary.
It proves that even class and political association couldn't protect her from the fear she helped institutionalize.
And as the community fragments internally, the response to the crisis takes these varied forms of external resistance. Walter Winchell, the loud radio commentator, rallies the Jewish community with a brash presidential campaign against Lindbergh.
Winchell's loud resistance is the catalyst for organized violence. His political rallies trigger anti-Semitic riots across the country,
which, ironically, forces the Jewish community to coalesce and organize around him out of necessity. They form these parallel or parastatal structures for self-protection.
You see the tension between working within the system and resorting to extra-legal defense.
On one side, you have the committees of concerned Jewish citizens seeking official protection, believing the police and courts can still function.
And on the other, the provisional Jewish police, a hastily assembled volunteer corps of vigilantes ready to respond to violence with violence.
And then you have Cousin Alvin, who epitomizes overt physical resistance.
He rejects Herman's passive faith in the system outright, arguing that true resistance means taking up arms, not sitting in an armchair listening to the radio.
Alvin acts on his conviction. He goes off to fight in the Canadian Army, ultimately losing his leg and returning a maimed hero.
Claiming he lost it for the Jews. His identity is absolutely tied to action and sacrifice.
And he clashes violently with Herman, accusing his father figure of moral cowardice. The generational tension is explosive. Passive legality versus violent, necessary action.
But the novel complicates this black and white view of identity and loyalty through Herman's interaction with his non-Jewish neighbor, Joey Cucuzza.
A second-generation Italian-American.
Right. When the violent riots break out in Newark, Cucuzza appears and offers Herman a gun for protection.
And Herman is appalled. He's clinging to his civic contracts, his faith in paying taxes and loving Election Day. He views Cucuzza's offer as preposterous because it relies on individualistic violence,
which undermines his idealized vision of the American system.
But Cucuzza represents something crucial here, a more complex, nuanced, or perhaps fully integrated version of Americanness.
He understands the individualistic undercurrent of violence and the necessity of self-protection that exists in American history.
And yet, he simultaneously despises European fascism, stating clearly that they need FDR bad before the ideology spreads irreversibly.
This scene perfectly illustrates the concept of identity integration. Cucuzza has integrated these seemingly contradictory aspects of Americanness,
acknowledging the need for self-protection against violence while remaining politically engaged and anti-fascist. Herman, conversely, refuses to see the historical complexities of the U.S.
The fact that the nation contains both deeply undemocratic, narrow, and violent elements alongside its democratic ideals.
Herman insists on an idealized, singular vision of America that is easily overwritten by Lindbergh. Cucuzza implicitly demonstrates the need for an accountable national story.
One that accepts that the U.S. is a creation built by many, sometimes contradictory forces. And only that realistic perspective can truly resist the forces of othering.
This detailed analysis of the plot brings us to the core function of the novel as literature and as a social commentary. Roth is doing much more than a simple historical thought experiment.
Right. The novel functions as a prescient warning by fundamentally rejecting the idea of historical determinism.
Which, for listeners, is that comforting notion that modern, stable Western nations, once established, will just naturally trend toward greater democracy and tolerance.
Roth shatters that.
He demonstrates that the procedural stability of democracy is not automatic or guaranteed. Demagoguery can rapidly dismantle established social contracts.
Especially when that demagoguery is met with widespread passivity and conformity from the majority.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture, the novel fundamentally critiques the over-reliance on institutions designed to safeguard democracy. A nation of laws only exists as long as those elected to office are committed to upholding them.
Otherwise, those laws become just things written in books with no meaning whatsoever.
The minute a leader decides those laws are inconvenient, the structure collapses, showing how fragile the American experiment really is.
This is where the genre of alternate history proves to be such a powerful diagnostic tool. By breaking the linear timeline, it ruptures our sense of consensual history.
It uses the terrifying alternate past to comment powerfully and evocatively on the actual present, forcing us to recognize the political potential of the moment we are currently in.
And the genre's focus is intimately tied to the concept of trauma. Trauma, as some critics describe it, is not so much a symptom of the unconscious, but rather a symptom of history.
And trauma resists linear narrative structures. It's experienced belatedly, durationally, and non-linearly. The Lindbergh era for young Philip is a massive historical trauma.
Alternate history captures this by exposing the gap between historical experience, what happened to the Roth family, and our sanitized linear historical narrative of inevitable victory.
Philip has to process an experience that our history books claim never happened.
We see literary cousins exploring this idea. You can look at Sinclair Lewis's 1935 novel, It Can't Happen Here,
which also imagined a fascist takeover of the U.S., showing the political relevance of this concept long before Roth's novel.
Lewis's novel was a direct, immediate political warning, written during the rise of European fascism, asking America to face its own internal capacity for authoritarianism.
But Roth takes it a step further by weaving in the question of narrative reality, a concept seen beautifully in Philip K. Dick's 1963 novel, The Man in the High Castle.
Right. Dick's work imagines a world where the Axis powers won World War II. It's a classic of the genre. But what's fascinating is the novel within the novel. The grasshopper lies heavy.
That inner fiction is crucial because it suggests that fiction itself has the power to be transformative. It alerts characters within Dick's alternate world to the truth of an other alternate world that more closely resembles our actual reality.
A world where the Allies won.
The power of fiction, even cheap popular fiction, is so great that a German bureaucrat in Dick's novel finds himself shivering at the vivid account of the Allied victory.
And he marvels at the capacity of narrative to conjure up a false, compelling reality.
This is precisely why that book is banned in Reich territory within the novel. It highlights how narrative itself, whether historical or fictional, constructs our sense of the world.
And if the state can control the narrative, it controls reality.
Therefore, alternate histories foreground the power of narrative in constituting our sense of ourselves as subjects in history, forcing us to constantly question what can we know about our past and how and when can we know it.
Roth's novel specifically focuses on what he calls the terror of the unforeseen.
And this phrase captures the force of history that is inherently unknowable as it unfolds. For Philip, it creates a traumatic anxiety about a present moment whose ultimate meaning will only be determined retrospectively.
He doesn't know if this is a temporary political setback or the permanent end of American liberty. And that uncertainty is the trauma.
The slow erosion mechanism is paramount here. The narrative avoids an immediate, violent, totalitarian takeover to emphasize how easily democratic norms can be undermined gradually from within.
Through legislation like Just Folks and Homestead 42.
Propelled by the passivity of the majority who believe, perhaps like Herman, that the system will automatically correct itself.
So the novel's ultimate commentary isn't solely about the victimization of one specific group, the Jewish community.
No, it's about demonstrating the universal, adaptable nature of the process of othering.
It shows how othering is subtle, simple, and hidden in lawfulness, a process that has been applied to various groups throughout American history.
And can be easily repurposed against any person or group in any nation. Roth emphasizes that this process is applied mainly through the manipulation of fear, the fear of dissent perceived as stemming from a minority or a specific economic class.
We are warned that whenever a segment of the population is labeled the greatest danger to this country, the foundations of democracy are at immediate risk, no matter how stable they appear. So this deep dive into the plot against America shows us how a sudden shift in leadership, even one supported by a cheering majority convinced they voted for stability and peace, can quickly translate into institutionalized fear.
And the erasure of identity for a minority population.
We've seen how seemingly benign programs become sophisticated tools of cultural destruction and displacement.
It really serves as a potent reminder that citizenship is not a fixed, immutable reality.
No, it's an ephemeral concept, subject to legislative ebbs and flows that can strip away rights one bureaucratic layer at a time.
We must be eternally vigilant against forces that prioritize division and conformity over unity and individual liberty.
The novel's strength, at the end of the day, lies in its insistence that to build a more resilient and democratic nation, we have to accept the historical complexities and contradictions of our national story.
We must acknowledge the existence of undemocratic, narrow, and violent elements alongside democratic ideals as authentic, living elements of American identity. Only by fully integrating this nuanced, sometimes dystopian version of history can we diagnose and effectively avoid the insidious processes of othering, rather than relying on a naive, idealized state fantasy that is easily rewritten by the first charismatic demagogue who arrives on the scene.